I would like to introduce Vera Johnson, who is our amazing parliamentarian, and she's going to go ahead and lead the discussion tonight. Give me 1 second while I go ahead and pull up the deck here. And oops. All right, Vera, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Nanette. Appreciate that. We have put handouts in the chat. So if you'd like to download those, you can do so now, or you can wait till later. We will put both the slides and the handouts up on our website, along with the recording of this boot camp. During this boot camp, we're going to go over the role of the unit parliamentarian. We're going to talk about motions. We're going to talk about amendments to motions. We're going to go over bylaws and how to change your bylaws. We're going to talk about e-bylaws. And then we're going to end with the nominating committee and the election. Next slide, please. The parliamentarian's key role is to assist the president to manage meetings and advise on parliamentary procedure when requested, to chair the bylaws committee to review the bylaws and the standing rules annually, to arrange the nominating committee's first meeting, providing information on nomination and the election process. And the parliamentarian is entitled to all rights and privileges of membership, including the right to make motions, to debate, and to vote. I've included the parliamentarian's job description as the first handout in the handouts packet that is in the chat and will be up on our website. Next slide, please. The parliamentarian duties is to attend all meetings. You serve as the president's advisor. You serve as the bylaws committee chairperson. Review the bylaws and standing rules annually, and instruct the nominating committee. As an assistant, you would advise on parliamentary procedure to the executive board and to the president, and during meetings. You will assist in meeting preparation with the president. You will determine the quorum during the meeting, because of course you cannot conduct business if you don't have a quorum. You will track speakers during the debate of a motion, and you'll listen to proceedings and advise the president by gently letting them know if something seems to be going awry and out of order during the meeting. One way to do that discreetly is to maybe have a little notepad and slip a note to the president if something is amiss and something's not going as it should be during the meeting. Handout number 2 is a sample PTA agenda with motions and phrases that will assist the president. So you can take a look at that when you do get a chance. Next slide, please. Parliamentary procedure is a time-tested method of conducting business at meetings. Next slide, please. Parliamentary law, what is it? It keeps order. We conduct one item of business at a time. It provides for equal opportunity and a chance for everyone to participate, all members to participate in making motions and debating motions and in voting. It provides for justice, fairness, everyone understands. It's important to provide translating during your meetings, translation services, and also the chair should explain things so that your membership understands what's happening. The right of minority to be heard and the right of the majority to decide, because we always use democratic rule. Next slide. Thank you. Motions. First step is to stand and obtain the floor. You wait to be recognized by the chair, usually the president. You make the motion. And when you make a motion, you should always use the phrase, I move, and then state your motion. It could be, I move that we have a parenting program at the park. You should not use, I so moved after somebody states something that they'd like to have happen. You cannot use so moved. Do not use, I make a motion or I motion that. The wording should be, I move, and then state the motion. The motion is seconded by another member. And by seconding the motion, it shows that someone else within the membership is interested in the motion. The chair then restates the motion. It's a good idea to have motion slips and provide for written motions. It makes life a lot easier for your president, for your secretary to keep track of the minutes, or you can just do it verbally. Then the chair asks for any discussion. So if there is debate, you need to make sure that an equal number of members get to speak for and against. And that would be something that the parliamentarian would keep track of to make sure that there's an equal number of members being given the opportunity to debate for or against the motion. When all debate is concluded, then the president or the chair puts the question. All in favor say aye. All opposed say no. And then the chair announces the result. The ayes have it and the motion has been adopted, or the motion has failed. We're getting some questions I'm seeing popping up about the handout. And just to let you know, it's in the chat. It's the very first item in the chat. If you look there and click on it, you can download the handouts. If you can't do that now or don't want to do that now, we will put them on the website, and I can email them out to everybody later too, as far as who have registered to attend this. So talking about handouts, you can take a look at handout number 3, which is the 8 steps to a motion. And also I encourage everybody to refer to the toolkit and the capta.org website for lots of good information on motions. Next slide. Amending motions. And handout number 4 is how-tos for amending a motion. And again, look at the toolkit, all under running your PTA for more information. But there's 4 different ways to amend a motion. First one is to insert or add words. For example, the motion that I gave you during the last slide was, I move that we have a parenting program at the park. To insert words, you might say, to amend that motion, I move that we have a parenting program in December at the park. So that would be an example of amending the motion. Another thing you can do to amend is to strike words. So you might take that same motion, I move to have a parenting program at the park. You might want to strike at the park and just have move to have a parenting program. Another example is strike words, or another way to amend is strike words and insert others. So you might say, I move to have a parenting program at the park. I want to strike park and say at the school auditorium. And then the 4th way to amend is to substitute one paragraph for another. And that would just substitute it completely. And you might say that you would like to have a ice cream social. And that would change the whole motion. It's important to remember that an amendment must be debated and voted on, and that adopting an amendment does not adopt the original motion. You still have to go back and vote on the original motion after the amendment has been dealt with. Next slide, please. Motions and voting methods. Okay, there are several ways to vote on a motion. You can have a voice vote. You can ask for a show of hands, or you can have folks stand and show their hands. Another way is the roll call. The 4th is the ballot. If you have a ballot vote, it's important that your secretary has your membership list on hand and that the secretary has ballots on hand. And usually when we talk about ballots, they're different colored slips of paper where folks can write aye or no or the name of a person or whatever on the ballot. And it's only those that are members can vote on a ballot. So it's important to be able to identify your members when you're passing out the ballot. And the last way is the general consent, which is basically if there is no objection, we are going to have a parenting program at the park. But if anybody objects, then you have to go to a vote, one of the other methods. Voting by proxy is always prohibited. And proxy includes phone calls, ballots sent out and then returned to the school office, or sending your neighbor, a non-member, spouse, or a child to vote in your place. That is not allowed. Non-members may not vote, make motions, or debate. And any actions that are taken in violation of the bylaws are null and void. Next slide, please. Okay, we're at our questions. Linda.
Besides the questions about all the handouts, I don't see any questions right now.
Okay.
We will take another break for questions throughout, and then at the end, we'll have Q&A as well. Oh, and see, one question just popped up. How do you update standing rules?
Good question. We are going to cover that in the next section. And let's hold off for that, but I am going to talk about how to update standing rules in the next section of our program here.
Okay.
Okay.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Since we've been doing our meetings over Zoom, during COVID, and not all the time, we're trying to get back to in person, but some people are still cautious about that. And so we still do some Zoom meetings and some in person when we can. When we're motioning and voting, and it's not by proxy because everyone's on it, we'll raise the hand, but people are also doing it via like a Google poll.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering if that is like, is there any like opposition to that? Or, I mean, I feel like it's good because then you can definitely see it in the minutes, and our secretary is really good about putting out like the Google polls.
That is perfectly acceptable and is a great way to do it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that is a great way to do it. A lot of times you can do, if it's simple motions and like ordinary business where you're going through your financial reports or whatever, a voice vote is easy, and you can get it done. When you have other motions that might be more touchy, you may want to go to a Google poll and get it done that way. But that's a great idea. And I know a lot of our units and councils in our district has done that too.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, next slide. Okay, now we're going to talk about bylaws. What are they? Bylaws are your legally binding document, and they contain rules that cannot be changed and rules that cannot be suspended. Who gets a copy? The president, your secretary, and the parliamentarian should always have a copy of the bylaws, including all of your executive board members. And any member upon request can review a copy. When are they updated? Your bylaws should be reviewed annually. And if changes need to be made, then the parliamentarian needs to ask the president to appoint a committee to do that. And they have to be updated every 5 years and approved by the state PTA. It used to be 3 years. It is now 5 years. And I think we have a lot of units within our district that are nearing that 5-year mark. So it's a good idea to start to take a look at that. You should have a copy of your bylaws that is going to be passed down to you or given to you as a parliamentarian if this is your first year. If you don't have one and your president and secretary can't find one, I would say contact your council. They should be able to supply you with a copy of your current bylaws that you should be reviewing. Okay, next slide, please. The articles. Our PTA bylaws are organized in articles, and these are the different sections: the cover page, name, purposes, basic policies and principles of PTA, the membership amount that your unit can charge. You have to charge what's in your bylaws. You can't increase that amount, and then take care of it later. If there needs to be a dues increase, that is a bylaws change, and you would have to go through the steps to do that. The officers and how they're elected is in section 5. Section 6 is duties of your officers and chairpersons. 7, your association meetings, what makes up your association, what your quorum is. An association quorum is your officers, your elected officers plus 4. Your executive board is in section 8. Your executive board is defined in that section. It usually includes your principal, a teacher rep, your officers, and your standing chair, standing chairs. You would take that total number, you would divide it in half plus 1. So it's a simple majority, half plus 1. And then section 9 goes over your council membership. Most of our units are part of the council. We do have, how many do we have now? We have 36 out of council units right now. Next page, please. Continuing on with the articles, charter procedure is in there. Relationships with the district, state and national PTA. Articles of organization, your identification numbers are in section 13. That would include your tax ID number, your state ID number, national number, your charitable trust number. All of those numbers are listed. And then any amendments, the amendment process is in section 15. Then you have your signatures page, very important. We'll talk more about that later, and your standing rules. Now, your standing rules outline procedures that are not included in your bylaws, and they cannot supersede the bylaws. They should be approved yearly, and they can be changed anytime with a simple majority, with a 30-day notice, or 2/3 without notice by the association. They can be changed between bylaws updates. So unless the standing rules are going to impact your bylaws, and the one area where it does impact your bylaws is changing your standing committee chairs, your standing committees. That changes your quorum, which in turn changes the bylaws. So if your standing rules do not change your bylaws, you're changing a meeting date, a day of the month or whatever, that can be done at an association meeting with a 2/3 vote with 30-day notice, or with a simple, simple majority, with 30-day notice, or a 2/3 vote of the voting body at an association meeting. The standing rules then should be sent to your council as a matter of record, so they have it on file, and the council will send it to us. When you update your bylaws, the standing rules do get sent in with your updated bylaws, and any changes at that time would be done with the bylaws changes. So the answer to that question was, they can be changed pretty much from meeting to meeting to assist in running your PTAs from administration to administration. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, the bylaws process. The president appoints a bylaws committee chaired by the parliamentarian. The committee reviews the bylaws to see if any changes are necessary, and then completes a set of the most current edition of bylaws for local units, for local PTAs, PTSAs. you should be doing this on e-bylaws. The only exception would be if your unit requires the Spanish English version, because that's not available right now on e-bylaws. But if you're like most of our units and you will be using an English only copy, you should be using e-bylaws. The committee then prepares and presents to the executive board the recommendations. And it would either be that no changes be made or the list of proposed amendments. The executive board will vote on the amendments and the outcome is then recorded in the minutes. The parliamentarian then completes the 33rd District PTA bylaws submittal form or cover sheet, listing all of the amendments, and you would list them as this is what it was and this is what it's going to be. So old and proposed wording. And you would email that along with the bylaws and the standing rules to your council parliamentarian. If you're in council or if out of council, you would be emailing the submittal form completely filled out and your bylaws and standing rules directly to me at parliamentarian@33rdpta.org. Next page, please. Oops, back. Once the bylaws are approved and signed by the state parliamentarian, they will be returned to your unit through the council, or if you're an out of council unit, you'll get them directly from me. What happens next is an association meeting is scheduled to adopt the amendments to the bylaws. Members must be notified of the meeting at least 30 days in advance, and a list of the proposed amendments must be included in the notice for the meeting. A 2/3 vote of the association membership is required to adopt the amendments. After adoption of the bylaws, the president will sign and the secretary will sign and date the signature page. The parliamentarian will then scan the signature page and email a readable copy to your council parliamentarian, or if out of council, to me, to 33rd District Parliamentarian, so that we can update our files. Next page, please. Okay, let's talk about e-bylaws. This is the page on capta.org that you go to sign up to request a username and password if you don't already have one. Most of our units pass that information down, but it's a good idea to go in and request one on your own. It's very easy to do so. You go to capta.org, look under PTA leaders, then services, and then e-bylaws, and you'll get to this page. You'll click request username and password, and then you'll fill in the form. You'll select the user type. If you're not the parliamentarian, select unit assistant. Then you'll select PTA district number, which is 33rd, and your council. You'll type in your school name, the city, and your California State PTA ID number, which you will find in your bylaws. It's on the numbers pages. It's on the very front page too. You'll enter a username using all lowercase, and please write it down. Click next and done and submit your request, and you should be emailed a password in 3 to 5 days. Next slide. Okay, this is a slide. This is the page for more information on capta.org. But I would like you to take a look at handout number 7 when you get a chance. It's the unit worksheet for e-bylaws. And it's a good idea to fill this out because it'll include information that you will need as you're going through and updating your bylaws. So I have provided you with that, and it's number 7. Next slide, please. Okay, the unit information record. This is the first page when you enter the e-bylaws system. If you notice 2 slides back where it said request user name and password, the next button on there said enter e-bylaws. So you would go there to enter the e-bylaw system too, to be able to update your new bylaws. This screen, only California State PTA can make changes to this screen. If there are any changes or errors, you'll need to contact your council parliamentarian for assistance. And what they'll do in turn is likely submit a change of status form on your behalf. That'll come through district and that will send up to state. And there was a question about seeing errors, and that's what you need to do. You need to contact your council parliamentarian and they will help you change that information. The next slide, please. Okay, this is the second slide. And this is where you'll enter whether or not you have an executive vice president, the number of vice presidents, and answer yes or no, corresponding secretary, financial secretary, auditor, is officer, yes or no. You're nominating the number of members of your nominating committee, your nominating committee alternates, and officers in our 33rd district all begin July 1st. So that should be the same for everybody. And vacancy notice served by, you would, and this would be for the president, it would be either the first VP or the executive VP. So this is a screen that you will be able to enter information on and update. Next slide, please. Okay, electronic bylaws. This is the third screen, and this is your association meetings. Some things to keep in mind. Notice that the last meeting of the year must appear after the word "and." So here, in this case, this unit has their association meetings on the second Thursday, and they happen in October, January, and April. So April needs to go after the "and" as the last meeting of the year. The annual election meeting month is April for this unit. We like to see it be March or April. And board members, excuse me, to call a special meeting. The usual number is 5 in this case. And the number of members in a quorum, this would be your total number of officers plus 4. Okay, the e-bylaws system will calculate the minimum quorum for you and insert it. You can increase it, but you can't decrease it. So keeping that in mind. Next slide. Okay, here is a sample of an error message. In this case, you've got the red box saying the executive board meeting must be at least 14 days before your association meeting. So looking at the last slide, their association meeting was on, I believe it was the second Thursday. So this is the executive board. Okay, go back, please. Okay, the second Thursday of the month. So advance one more. So your association meeting is the second Thursday of the month. You cannot have an executive board meeting on the first Tuesday. It has to be the fourth Thursday of the month. So there has to be 2 weeks between your executive board meeting, which should come first, and then your association meeting would come after that, 14 days later. So in this case, you would get the red banner saying you've got an error and you will not be able to complete your bylaws unless that error is fixed. Also on the screen, you've got your maximum unbudgeted bills between meetings for approval. And again, your board members to call a special meeting of the executive board is 5. This might be high for some of our executive boards that are, don't have that many folks. You might want to lower that. And then again, the system will calculate your quorum for you, and you can increase that, but you cannot decrease for the executive board. Next slide, please. And we have questions.
We do have some questions.
Okay.
Okay, going back, one of the questions was, if a PTA member is requesting a copy of the bylaws, are we allowed to give them a copy? And are there any limitations like blacking out the tax ID number and signatures, I'm guessing?
If a member is requesting a copy, you can show it to them and they can take a look at it. Linda, you can help me on this. I don't see a reason why they can't have a copy of the bylaws. If you have a reason to believe that there might be a need to black out numbers, I suppose you can do that.
Yeah.
But
They can have a copy if you're giving them. Highly recommend blacking out the signatures and the identification numbers. Most of the time when people request a copy, they have concerns or questions. So we always recommend to go over it in person. So you can, the bylaws are extremely important, but it's dry and not everybody gets it or knows where to find things, and then it becomes tedious. So if you sit with them, you can go over it and explain, and may hopefully clarify some questions or concerns that they may have. So it's always best to go over it in person. Nobody really wants a copy of the bylaws. They just want answers and want to figure out why we're doing what we're doing, and what the rules are. If you're emailing a copy, again, I just take out the ID numbers, and I prefer blacking out the signature as well. It's sensitive information that we do not want out there. So that's what I would recommend.
that's a great recommendation. Also, there is a bylaws information summary page that you can provide. And that's very last item in the handouts that are posted in the chat. It's a good idea to fill this out and provide this to all of your executive board, and so they could have it at their fingertips. It's one page. It goes over all the important stuff. The numbers aren't on here. There's no tax ID. Well, there's a tax ID number. I take it back. But this should be provided to your executive board. And Linda had a very good point. We need to safeguard our information from any wrongdoing. So I would say still black out the numbers, cover up the signatures if they insist on having a copy.
And then there were some questions about the handouts. So I'd probably just say, yes, everything, if you follow along with the slides, everything that's being covered is in the handouts, including the steps on the bylaws process and how to approve them. And then the PowerPoint presentation and the recording of this will be posted. So you'll have it after to review. So I think you'll be okay. Then there's the question on e-bylaws. Someone had found discrepancies when they went in, corrected it. Is that all that needs to be done? So the way I, Vera, read that question is the difference between like e-bylaws and your signed current copy and the difference between those two. But if I misunderstood, then.
No, that's correct. There were some discrepancies when I went, and I was told by our council parliamentarian at the time that it's the hard copy that we go by, not the and not the electronic version. But it looked like when I went back in recently, it looked like it did save the correct, when I corrected it. I just didn't know if it was something that needed to be sent on somewhere else, or if that's.
No, e-bylaws is a tool that you're using to work on your bylaws. It is not a submittal. You would download the PDF and submit that. So what's in e-bylaws is whoever went in there last to update the information is what's going to be in there. So the previous time they were updated, your bylaws were updated. They may not have used e-bylaws and just did the fillable PDF. So that's why there might be a difference between your current hard copy, your signed current bylaws and e-bylaws. You always go with your signed. So yeah, and I'm sorry.
And then you were saying too, just so I understand, because we For our executive board members this year, we kind of started a Google Drive and we put our bylaws up on that for our board members to be able to look at. I don't think anyone does, but I should definitely note that we should be blocking out the tax ID numbers and the signatures, correct?
You know, if it's a private, if only your board members have access to it,
Correct.
my understanding that you can put your bylaws up in that fashion. You
Okay.
can't put it up on a website that just anyone.
No way. It was just just a shared drive for the executive board members. And
Yeah.
then when you're not on the board anymore, you get taken off and new ones get put
They
on.
can have access to it. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. I think that's fine.
Vera, can I ask a clarifying question about standing rules?
Sure.
I know like the bylaws obviously not changeable. It's the big stuff. It's a bit dry, and I know California State PT has been working really hard to kind of pull some of the, I guess, the minutia out basically, and so it's really kind of it keeps getting smaller and smaller. But the standing rules is where we put kind of like the how to, right, for our
Mhm.
different councils. So for instance, I'm with a council and we had a college and career fair, and we realized that we had several, like, I don't know, construction kind of going on, and so we lost the schedule of who was supposed to do what when, and so we added that because we felt like that would be helpful for, you know, incoming board, or, you know, we decided to add some more description on like some of the jobs, for instance. Is that like the right use of standing rules, would you say?
That's correct. You put your month-to-month, day-to-day procedures in the standing rules. And when they pulled all of that stuff and they made the standing rules the bylaws a lot shorter, a lot of the procedural stuff was moved into the standing rules. I've got to tell you though, right now, I haven't seen them yet. I understand that the signers, you know, who is eligible to sign checks for your PTA, where it's always your president, your treasurer, and then you can add another or two other people. That is in your standing rules right now. State PTA is going to move that back into bylaws, is what I'm understanding, but I haven't seen the 2021 bylaws yet. Linda, have you heard anything?
No, I have not heard nor seen.
Yeah, so that's my understanding. So if you're going to change the signers, you're not going to be able to get that done by changing your standing rules anymore. That's going to go back into the bylaws.
And then one quick question about, so I know California State PTA had updated recently a couple times, I think the bylaws, because of the Zoom meetings, and that's probably going to be something that doesn't fully go away. We're, as parliamentarians coming in this year, we should make sure that the bylaws are updated to the most recent version, right? Or does it still take effect regardless of whether or not we're still working off of, like, I don't know, 2019?
It takes effect whether or not you update your bylaws. There's been a change in opinion. Last term, the state parliamentarian said that bylaws had to be changed and those sections had to be physically added into the bylaws, and that would trigger a bylaws change in the approval process through the channels. The new parliamentarian for state PTA has said now that when the state PTA changes that and puts that verbiage in the bylaws for units, councils, and districts, it changes everybody's, and you don't have to go in and make that change. So in essence, you can add that verbiage, and we all can have our Zoom meetings, without having to change the bylaws or worry about even putting that as a standing rule for the time being until we can change our bylaws. That has all changed. So we can all take a deep breath and know that we don't have to change our bylaws to be able to continue to have our Zoom meetings.
Yeah, great. Because I think I was like, oh no, it's like December's right around there. I'm like, when does this thing run out?
I know. And I just heard about it like a couple weeks ago, so, or last week. I wasn't aware. So yeah, that's good news. Any other questions?
There was one more, for the purposes, it's a very specific one, so not sure if you want to go into that, but I'm going to read the question because I don't want to ignore it either. It's for the purposes of calculating a quorum. How are co-vice presidents considered? Do they each get one vote or do they split a vote?
Okay, the PTA does not recognize co-vice presidents. If you want to have an assistant, you've got to write that in, you've got to change your bylaws, and it changes your quorum, and they do get a vote. But you have one vote, one vice president, one vote. There are no co-presidents, no co-vice presidents, unless for the vice presidents, unless you have a system where you have an assistant. But to be able to do that, that is a bylaws change, and that does change your quorum. Okay, there's a question, is the template available yet? The answer is no. We were hoping, and it's not midnight yet, we were told we would get it today. Linda's laughing. We haven't seen anything. So as soon as we get it, I'm going to send it out to the council parliamentarians, and they will send it out to all of you. Once they approve the template and it gets translated and they have all the different versions, e-bylaws will change as well. So all of those changes will also be incorporated into e-bylaws. The whole process is one thing. It's the update to 2021. Okay, any other questions?
Nothing regarding bylaws. Wondering if are we able to review the recordings after the call? Not right away, but it will be posted on our website maybe a week or so. Nan?
Nan?
Sorry, I can unmute quick enough. Yeah, probably even like a couple of days. I think it's a matter of me just downloading it, then kicking it over to the communications person who also has a full-time job. So, but he's pretty quick. So I would say probably, within the week for sure.
And that's it for questions for now.
All right.
I actually had something, if you can hear me. It was in regards to, we have standing chair positions that we are going to, because they're year-round, that are part of our board, our executive board, that we felt that do not necessarily need to be year-round, because it throws off our because those are since appointed, and our PTA president feels that it puts an advantage for the president in regards to having more votes since they're appointing the people. So we were going to be changing those in the standing rules. So does that have to be, when I change that, change the positions from those board positions to just being chairs, that has to be done through the bylaws as well, correct?
That's in your standing rules. Your standing committees are listed in your standing rules. If you have, say, 5 standing committees and you want to eliminate 3 of them and only have 2 standing committees, that's going to impact your quorum by 1 for your executive board.
Correct.
But you don't have to change your bylaws at that time, because your quorum could be higher than what it needs to be.
Okay. All right. So then until it's absolutely necessary, like the 5-year mark, that's when we have to change them, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let's move on. Next slide. Okay, now we're going to talk about nominations and elections. The nominations process is extremely important and has tremendous influence on the future of your PTA for years to come. It even impacts the sustainability of your PTA if it's going to continue for years to come. So it's very, very important that we do this correctly and we do it the same way every time. The first step is to consult the PTA bylaws. And you'll take a look at Article 5, which is officers and their election. Next slide, please. The nominating committee. The nominating committee is elected by the association at least 60 days prior to the election. It is an elected committee. The president has to take nominations from the floor. The nominee has to accept. Generally, they will leave the room so a vote can be taken. And it's not a matter of raise your hand who hasn't done it before, I'll be on the nominating committee. The committee is an elected committee. It's a unique committee in that it should represent different parts of your association and include a student member. If you have student members, it should include your staff member. Last year's members are ineligible. We need to maintain lists of nominating committees to make sure that you don't have the same person serve on the nominating committee 2 years in a row. Your president is always ineligible to be a member of the nominating committee. But the parliamentarian, you can be a member of the nominating committee, but not 2 years in a row if you are elected into that position. The nominating committee serves until the election. You could have come up with a slate, identified your candidates, turned in your report, and one of the candidates, one of the nominees could, for whatever reason, have to withdraw. In that case, if it's before the election, the nominating committee would have to come back together to try to select another candidate. The parliamentarian, if not elected to the nominate, well, even if elected, will arrange the first meeting and provide instructions to the nominating committee. The parliamentarian will conduct the election of the chair of the nominating committee. The committee meets in executive session, which means that all deliberations, all discussions are confidential and will remain confidential forever. The committee should be able to have frank, open discussions, and again, keep that information confidential. Next slide, please. The nominating committee members must be knowledgeable about all things PTA. They should be aware of potential nominees, have a good idea of who's out there, who would make a potential candidate for all the various positions. They should be familiar with the qualifications, willing to devote the time to be able to find a good slate for your PTA, and able to maintain confidentiality. If a member is unable to make the first meeting, the alternate becomes the permanent member. So if you end up having a second meeting or a third, the person that was nominated or elected to the nominating committee initially is no longer a part of that committee. Okay, next slide, please. Nominating committees, deliberations. The parliamentarian should provide a list of positions that need to be filled, along with the duties and requirements for each position. The committee needs to determine the skill sets needed for each position and review the membership list, which is provided by your secretary. The committee should come up with a list of questions, and they should ask the same questions to all of the candidates for that particular position. That's really important. They should select the best candidates, and they should try to provide a balanced slate that's representative of your entire school community. Next slide, please. Candidate basic qualifications. They should be a supporter of your PTA. They should be knowledgeable about PTA. They should be able to work well with others. They should be dependable and have the time to serve. And they may have special skills, knowledge, or experience. This area is usually financial or a specific area that would require knowledge. Maybe a past president would make a great, parliamentarian is appointed, but looking for special skills that would be beneficial to the various positions that you're trying to fill. Candidate considerations, you may want to look at term limits. No person in a unit PTA can serve more than 2 years. And you don't want to necessarily move the same group of people among the different positions. It's good to bring in new blood. So that's a consideration. If you have student members, it's a good idea to get your students involved in the various areas. You may want to have school staff involved, but be careful with that. A lot of our PTAs end up with too many staff members or teachers on the executive board, and we want to have a good mix of parents and school staff and teachers and students if at all possible. And financial officers, you want to consider people who have the skills that may be required to be able to do the books. Not everybody likes numbers or is especially good with numbers. So, they may be better in a different area, say a programs chair or membership. And you may want to leave the number crunching to your financial people, folks that like to post the ledgers and do the tax filings. Next slide, please. Contacting candidates. Make sure when you talk to your candidates that you clearly define the responsibilities involved in doing the job. Don't leave anything out. Be honest about the amount of time it'll take to do the job and the meetings that have to be attended. Ask if they're willing to serve, but don't make any promises. And never, ever try to persuade a reluctant individual. That never works out for the best. Get back to all individuals after the decision, whether you've decided to put them on the slate or your committee has decided to go with another individual. You always need the candidate's consent to be able to put them on your slate or on your nominating committee report. Next slide. The nominating committee report. There is a report in your handouts packet. It's number 9. Number 8 is the nominating committee checklist. You may want to look at that too. There's a lot of good information to help you put together the nominating committee. On the nominating committee report, I did do a fillable report. It's not going to be fillable in your handouts because it didn't work that way when I scanned it all together, but I will send it out to everybody and we'll post all of the fillable items on the website along with a copy of this boot camp and the slides and everything. So look for that. So getting back to the report should be signed by all the committee members. The chair reads and submits the report or slate at the association meeting at least 28 days prior to the annual association meeting or election meeting. So this is the first report of the nominating committee. The report may be sent, emailed to members or posted at the school office. The chair then also reads the final report or the slate at the annual association or election meeting prior to the actual election. And just to mention, any openings that occur after the election will be filled by the board-elect. So you may have a slate where you have openings on it, and that's okay. That you'll still have your election, and then the board-elect will be responsible to fill any openings after the election. The election of officers. There's an election checklist, which is a quick checklist. It's number 10 in the handouts. Take a look at that. It'll help you, and share that with your president if you aren't a president, if you're the parliamentarian. Your bylaws will give you the month and day of the election. The bylaws will also tell you who can vote, which is basically your membership list. Your quorum required, you're at an association meeting. And again, no proxy votes. We talked about that before. No phone calls, no ballots sent home and sent back to the office. You can't send your neighbor Joe to go vote for you or a non-member spouse or your child. And nominations will be taken from the floor. And there may be a ballot vote if there are 2 or more nominees for a particular position. Next slide, please. The meeting procedures. Probably my best piece of advice, personally being a unit president, council president, district president, is to go through the checklist and reread the sections of the toolkit when it comes to elections. Use it as a reference. You don't need to know what it says all year round, but when you're up against an election the night before, I always pulled the toolkit out and looked at what it said to make sure the procedures that were going to be followed were the correct procedures. Okay, the meeting procedures, basically, the first thing that happens is the president presides and the parliamentarian reads the bylaws section pertaining to elections. Next, the final slate is presented by the nominating committee chair. The president then conducts the election, and nominations from the floor are taken for every position, and the nomination from the floor requires the members' consent. They generally have to be present, but we have seen occasions where the consent is done in writing and provided ahead of time. So that's very, very unusual. If something comes up and it's unusual and it doesn't fit into the mold, the best thing I can say is check with your counsel and be prepared ahead of time for anything that might come up. Next slide, please. Okay, election by voice vote. The ballot may be dispensed with if only one nominee for an office. So as the president goes through the procedure, the nominating committee chair will read the slate. The president then says, AZ Duck has been nominated for president, for the office of president. Are there any nominations from the floor? And they will wait. There's nominations from the floor. You don't need a second, but the nominee has to consent. If there are no nominations from the floor, the president will then state the nominations. Hearing no nominations from the floor, the office for the position of president has been closed. The nominations have been closed. Then they will move on to the next position. Nominations for the executive vice president. The nomination for the executive vice president is Donald Duck. Or that's not a good idea, say Minnie Mouse. Are there any nominations from the floor? So you'd go through the same procedure. Hearing none, the nomination for executive vice president has been closed. You go through each position. If there is but one nominee for each position, the president would then say, if there are no objections, the ballots may be dispensed with since there is but one nominee for each office. Is there any objection to this procedure? Ask for an aye or a no vote. Then the president will restate all of the names and offices of individuals to be elected. Next slide, please. And then at the conclusion of that, you restate all the names, then you say, congratulations, the following individuals have been nominated for the term of 21, 22, and you go over all the names. And that information will then get recorded in the minutes. If there is an election by ballot required and any member may request a ballot vote, it must be voted upon immediately without debate. And it is required for 2 or more nominees. The president would have to appoint a teller committee of 3, 2 tellers, and a chair of the teller committee. The tellers would then distribute, collect, and count the votes. The tellers report, the president announces the results, and the voting continues until one nominee receives a majority of votes cast. The secretary records the results in the minutes, and there always has to be a motion to destroy ballots at the conclusion of the ballot vote. I would refer you to the election checklist. There's information there about elections by ballot. The other major thing to keeping in mind is that the secretary should have a membership list and should be prepared with ballots for any type of an election, because you could have nominations from the floor and that will result in having to have a ballot vote. So that's very important. Next slide, please. Virtual meetings and voting. We talked about this a little earlier on. If the election is uncontested, the state can be elected by voice vote, and you can do that on Zoom, or if you prefer to have a Google poll or have a poll within Zoom, you can do that as well. If the election is contested, the unit must hold a ballot vote. And that is done by, again, on Zoom using the Google poll, but you need to prepare that in advance. You could go to capta.org and do a search on virtual meetings and elections, and there's more information in there. The unit must ensure that each voting member has equal advance notice of the virtual election meeting and that they have access to the technology needed to vote. You need to be able to verify membership, so you should have a registration process where you are verifying their membership, either hopefully through Totem, or if you can't find them on Totem, ask them to send a scan of their membership card so you can verify that they are in fact members. It's important to keep detailed minutes of your teleconference or virtual meeting, and it's crucial as a record of the election and as proof that you have conducted the election meeting, especially if your election meeting or results are challenged. So it's important to document everything, follow proper procedures. If you need help, contact your council or contact district, and we can help you through that. Next slide. And here's some resources. Of course, your unit, your council bylaws, our 33rd District PTA website, California State PTA website, including the toolkit, run your PTA, your leadership made easy on the California State PTA website has a lot of great information, news and publications, and the COVID-19 tab on this California State PTA website, and also the National PTA website, which is www.pta.org. Okay, next slide. Any questions? We have a raised hand.
Yeah, we have, but can we do the chat ones first and then let people unmute to ask their questions? Is that okay?
That sounds good.
Okay. So going back to the bylaws, someone was asking, they just reviewed their unit bylaws and submitted them for approval. How long does it take to get approved?
The entire process can take 6 to 8 weeks. Once you submit it for approval, if you submit it to council, hopefully they get it to the district within a few days. When I get them, I turn them within a couple days. State has promised to get them done in a reasonable amount of time, but I'm saying allow 3 to 4 weeks, probably, hopefully, and that should do it.
And then for elections, someone was asking if we only have one person running for each office, do we not need to have an election?
Even if you only have one person running for each office, which is usually the case, yes, you do have to have an election. It has to be documented in your minutes that an election was held, and that in most cases it's a voice vote. And that, yes, you do have to have an election. Even when you only have the slate shows one person, which it normally does, nominations need to be open to the floor at every election for each position.
Yeah, so definitely hold an election. It's just if it's one person for each office, you do not need to have a ballot vote. It can be done by voice vote. I think that's the clarification. And then the other one was, you said the nominating committee chairperson needs to be elected. Is this by the nominating committee members?
Yes, the chair is elected by the nominating committee members, and the parliamentarian conducts that election with the nominating committee at their first meeting.
Well, that's all I saw in the chat. So if we want to address raised hands.
Okay.
Hi. Okay, I'm the one who asked the question regarding the bylaws, the submission. Okay, it's already more than for a month, so I haven't heard from the council or from the 33rd district whether my bylaw is already approved or not. So how do I confirm that?
Okay. Why don't you send me an email separately, and I'll let you know if I've received it. And my email is parliamentarian@33rdpta.org.
Okay, thank you. I will email you privately. Thanks.
Okay, and I'll respond to you right away. Thank you. Okay. Young?
Thank you. Couple of questions on nominating committee is election itself. Do we nominate, let's say there are five nominees. Do we nominate those individuals one at a time? Could we nominate them in a slate?
You nominate them as a block. So
Okay.
you have, if you require 5, for example, members of your nominating committee, you would take the nominations, you would list them up on a board. You may have 10, and the 5 people with the most votes, everybody would vote for 5 because you need 5. The 5 people with the most votes would become the nominating committee. And if you have 1 alternate, the next person would be your alternate. If you have 2 alternates, the next person, the number 6 would be the first alternate. Number 7 would be your second alternate. But everybody would vote for 5 individuals if you have a nominating committee of 5.
Sorry, I may have misspoken my question. So getting those 5 people on the slate to be voted on, do we nominate those individually? Do we nominate those all 5 people who may have shown interest?
You would nominate them individually.
Got it. Okay.
And
Matt?
folks can self-nominate too. You
Got
can
it. Right. Right. And a couple more questions, if I may. The chairperson for the nominating committee, I'm a parliamentarian, I conduct a meeting. There's a chance that they may ask and vote to nominate the parliamentarian to be the chairperson. Is that allowed? Is that not allowed?
That's allowed. If you are a member, if you have been elected as a member,
Okay,
then you can be elected as the chair as well.
understood. You mentioned the previous year's members, last year's members of the nominating committee is not eligible. How about 2 to 3 years prior? Someone that's up 3 years
That's
ago.
acceptable. They are.
Okay, got it. And one more question on the ballot requirement. How do you conduct the ballot, the voting by ballot in a Zoom or a virtual setting?
You would have to do a Google poll and
Okay.
set that up in advance to be able to plug it in quickly.
Okay, thank you.
You're
Can
welcome.
I jump in real quick here on that? Because I know when we, in our council and some of the units had like some contested ones, I feel like those are the ones that are really tricky. Make sure you set up time with your team, the parliamentarian, the membership person, like everybody who's going to take part in your council, if you're enlisting their help, like their guidance, doing like a not even the same day, but like doing like a practice run a few days before so you can work out the kinks, get the scripts down, be clear. And another thing I did learn from another unit, which I thought was brilliant, is they made a cutoff on the registration, which gave them time to verify all of the registrants and make sure that they could put, people into a waiting room who needed to go in the waiting room for the, duration of the voting part of the meeting. So just trying to think through all of those, like if you are still going to have a virtual kind of setting, thinking through all of those things and trying to work out the logistical kinks will save you a lot of time if you do that in advance.
Great. Thank you for the guidance. I appreciate it.
I also had some questions about the nominating committee. So I understand that people who served on the nominating committee last year cannot serve again this year. But what if we have a president? So I know traditionally presidents are not allowed to serve on the nominating committee, but what if it's a president who is outgoing? So she's finishing her second year as president. Would
No.
they ever be allowed? No. Okay, great. That's what I thought, but I was asked to ask that question. So great. And then regarding the election of the nominating committee, we can still do, we're currently doing our meetings virtually, and it's looking likely that when we elect our nominating committee, it will also be in a virtual, Zoom, similar to this setting. Can we elect them with the voice vote? We could still do that, right? We don't have to do a poll like you had mentioned, or?
Well, if you have 5 members on your nominating committee
Mhm.
and you have 5 nominees for the nominating committee candidates to be, then you could do a voice vote. If you've got
Right.
more than that, you do need to do a poll.
Got it.
You need to figure out who the top.
Okay, that helps clarify it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
There were some more questions that popped in the chat. First one, going back, sorry. Good evening. The it's just swapped. 1 moment. The 2-year term needs to be indicated in the bylaws, correct? It is not automatic. That's from Cynthia Corrales.
All terms are 1 year for all officers, but you can serve 2 terms or 2 years.
2 consecutive terms.
2 consecutive terms. Yes. Is that the answer?
I'm not sure. It's from Cynthia Corrales, so if she wants to unmute and clarify the question.
Cindy, come on.
Hi.
Hi, Cindy.
Yeah. Hi. How are you? No. Yesterday, it was brought up in the unit president's roundtable that officers can serve 2 years. So I just want a clarification on that. So it's still stated as 1 year, but they can serve for 2.
Right.
Okay.
Officer's term is 1 year, but you can serve 2 consecutive years.
Okay. So the bylaws are still going to state
Position.
1 year.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Just want
because they would
clarification
have
on
to
that.
be re-elected, and that's why
Yes.
it's called
But
2 consecutive
yesterday
terms.
it was stated at our meeting that officers can serve, can serve 2 years, but people misunderstood. Some people misunderstood that it would be automatic. So I just want to clarify that, because I don't want to come back and say you can do it for 2 years.
No.
You
have
need
to
to be elected.
They have to be elected to the
Yeah.
second year.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that.
And then the next question is, can you have board members on the nominating committee?
Yes. Yes, as long as they are elected.
I have a question going back to the lady previous. We had one of our units that wanted to have 2 years for the term rather than 1 year. They were stating that, as soon as you come in, that's your year of learning. And then the second year is when you're really working. So could it be changing the bylaws a 2 year,
No.
2 times 4 years? No.
The unit bylaws are provided by the state PTA.
Okay. So that's
Units have a 1 year term for all of their officers.
okay. And that cannot be changed.
No, but they
Okay.
can be re-elected into the same position for a second consecutive term.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
The next question is, when making a motion at the association meeting to elect nominating committee, is the correct verbiage, I move to elect so-and-so to the nominating committee?
Well, it's not a motion, it's an election. So the president would say, we're going to have the election of our nominating committee. the election, it is open for nominations. So then you can nominate yourself. You can self-nominate as a member of the nominating committee if you're eligible, or another member can nominate you. Like I nominate Linda to be on the nominating committee. Linda, and then the president would say, Linda, do you accept? And Linda would say yes or no. And she
Sure.
would add her to the slate that you're creating for your nominating committee. And then you'd go until there are no more nominations from the floor for the positions of the members of the nominating committee. This can take a long time. If you have a large membership, you can have 20 people on that list. So it can take a long time. But you have to open it up to everybody who are members. You have to be a member to be a member of the nominating committee. And you have to have been a member for 30 days. I don't think we talked about that, but it's important that you have to have been a member for 30 days to serve on the nominating committee. And anybody that the nominating committee nominates for a position has to have been a member for at least 30 days.
That's it for the chat for now. There was another hand raised.
It's me again.
Okay.
One more question about the officer terms. I specifically heard you say 2 consecutive terms multiple times. Is it 2 terms total, or so someone could have served 2 consecutive terms? 3 years later, this person has 3 different kids. Could that person be then serve as an officer after having served 2 consecutive terms?
Yes, they can.
Thank
And
you.
you can serve in a different official position too. You can be, serve in one position for 2 terms, and then, the 3rd year serve in another capacity. And then even after the 3rd term, you can be nominated again to serve in the position you served a year ago. So as long as there's a term in between, you can be elected.
So
Just-
we have a talented treasurer that we had that graciously served us 2 consecutive years.
Mhm.
Give her a break. 4th year comes around. Hey,
Hey, there you are.
okay, great.
You're a
Just
great
making sure
treasurer, we need you.
that's still good. Thank you. Thank you.
Not until she got to taste that freedom.
Well, we still have some time. Any more questions out there?
Yeah, if you're in the nominating committee and they want to nominate you for a position, can that be done? Even if you're, even in the nominating committee?
Yes, the way our nominating committees are structured, that can be done, but you need to leave the room so the committee can discuss your qualifications. And any
Okay.
nominee that is brought forth and put on the slate of the nominating committee has to get a majority vote of the nominating committee to serve
Okay,
that
okay.
capacity. But yeah, yes, you can.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I also think, some people avoid joining the nominating committee because they think they'll be automatically on next year's board, which is wrong, although it does often happen, not unintentionally, right? People are most likely to raise their hand, or probably the most likely to say yes to being a treasurer, suckers. But, what I find to be helpful too, and I don't know maybe who necessarily organizes this at each unit, but I was at one unit and they pushed out via the weekly newsletter that they send out. So it was a Google form, kind of their straw ballot, which was really smart, but they listed the job description, kind of the long and short. And at the beginning of the Google form, you can kind of add some information. They kind of listed when we hold meetings, how long they last, kind of what are your roles, responsibilities, really short, nothing too intimidating. But I think that really helped. And then they went a step further and they reached out to the principal and via their principal to teachers, soliciting parents and family members and guardians who are interested in positions possibly. And then they were doing basically a lot of individual reach out. And it sounds like a lot of work, but it felt like, when you send out a mass message to families, they may or may not take you up on it, maybe the most engaged will. But I think those one-on-one, where a teacher made a recommendation and made the introduction, and then you kind of followed up saying, hey, would love to meet with you if you have questions. And I mean, we ended up with a full slate. And it was a little school with a little tiny board that had been for years having such a hard time getting any new people. So I'm not saying that's your job as parliamentarian, but you know, stuff you can kind of help guide your committee so they feel more empowered and have some tools when they get to that table and they're starting to deliberate and think. They actually have candidates to look at, you know, instead of begging.
That's a great idea. That's awesome. Okay.
Well, Vera, I feel like you've blown their mind.
I think are no further questions, and we can go ahead and conclude this boot camp, this workshop. Thank you for all the great questions and participation. It's been great. You guys have done a great job, and good luck in your work and your endeavors as a parliamentarian. Know that I'm here if you have any other questions that maybe cross your mind after we're done here. Please send me an email. I'll get right back to you. It's parliamentarian@33rdpta.org. Thank you for spending your evening with us.
Thank you.